Valkyrie Elysium is a puzzling game. Considering it's been 15 years since the last entry in the series, way back on the PS2, you'd think Square would want to deliver a familiar game to the hardcore fans that have been patiently waiting for so long. That's not the case with Valkyrie Elysium, and that's not necessarily a bad thing either. While this entry is in a completely different genre, the story and characters tread familiar territory that ultimately makes for an entertaining ride. Valkyrie Elysium is steeped in Norse mythology, complete with characters, items, and locations you're probably all familiar with. In the game itself, you play as Maria, a Valkyrie in service to the Allfather Odin. Now, Odin was weakened by Fenrir in a battle, and he needs Maria to heal him up. Now, her task won't be easy. Early on, she encounters Hilde, a Valkyrie who's bound and determined to stop her at all costs. Now, her allegiance is with another character that I won't spoil here, but to say the least, things are not what they seem, and there's this mystery that is kind of slowly boiling throughout the game. Now, you'll also be recruiting cleansed souls to be your companions called your Anheriar. In the beginning of the game, Maria has this sort of blind, almost robotic loyalty to Odin, and Odin is not always kind in return to her. However, her Anheriar become compassionate towards her and seek to lighten the burden bestowed upon her, even though she's initially reluctant to accept it. I'll admit that the story felt kind of bland at the beginning, but it slowly builds towards something much more interesting that I'll let you discover for yourself. If you prefer, there is Japanese audio that you can play with from the very beginning of the game. Overall, I'd say with the story, the problem is kind of the budget. I feel like the developers didn't always have the opportunity to do what they wanted to because, well, their budget was kind of limited. While they do get really clever with some interesting camera movement here and there, the lip syncing doesn't match up at all. In fact, it's pretty bad.
Perhaps you are due an explanation.
Now, you don't have to have played the other games in the franchise. This is a brand new main character, a totally new story, and you can easily come in here fresh and understand everything that's happening. While the story probably isn't the main reason you'll be playing, it's surprisingly compelling by the end. Gameplay-wise, Valkyrie Elysium completely diverges from previous titles. The first two games had some iteration of a turn-based combat system, but here it's now a full-on action RPG. What's interesting is that the game is quest-based. You'll work out of your hub, Valhalla, and here you can talk with your team, talk with Odin, fight in practice battles, and much more. Now, the levels themselves are fairly linear. Now, there are some side routes you can find here and there where you can discover chests, break boxes for upgrade items, or just discover other collectibles. And I have to say, you'll be breaking a lot of boxes. And this isn't necessarily a bad thing, it's actually oddly satisfying. It'll keep you constantly engaged because not only is it quick and fun to do, but they also drop items that will be useful for upgrading your character and your weapons. As for the combat itself, it feels incredible. You'll have a light and heavy attack, a dodge, a block, etc. But where the real depth and fun comes in are from your Anheriar. Once recruited, you can summon them for up to 1 minute at a time into battle. They'll also imbue your weapons with their corresponding elements. This is important because you'll need these elements to crush and ultimately immobilize enemies. Conveniently, each enemy has their weakness on their health bar. Now, it seems kinda silly that would just be there so you can see it, but as a player, I found it really useful because I didn't have to think, I just knew, okay, they're weak to fire, and I could use either a fire spell or imbue my weapon with fire and hit their weakness that way. You'll also grow to have a big arsenal of weapons from swords, spears, and even this polearm that breaks into 2 one-handed maces. Each can be upgraded to unlock more moves using gems you find throughout the world. What's cool is you can constantly experiment using different weapons and different combinations of spells. Personally, my favorite weapons were the sword that you start out with, as well as that polearm that breaks into 2 one-handed maces. And their names are here, but I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce them. You can also upgrade Maria herself using the same gems. Here you can upgrade her damage output, defense, health bar, ability bar, and much more. Now, you don't gain experience like a traditional RPG, but there is that same constant sense of progression that feels great. One other mechanic to mention that I really enjoyed was this grappling hook. At first, you mainly just use it to traverse the environments, but you can use it to pull yourself towards enemies, and that just feels so satisfying. 2 minor complaints I have with that though is that I wish it was a little quicker. Sometimes in battles, if you're way on the other side of the battlefield from an enemy, it feels like it takes a little too long to get to them. Also, I felt like it was underutilized in the environments. I felt like it would have been cool to have some sort of traversal puzzles or just ways that you could use it to find secrets. It's such a cool mechanic, and I wish they took advantage of it more. One thing I will say is that the game reuses enemies a lot. The game slowly adds new ones with each chapter, but you'll encounter the same handful over and over, even deep into the game. It would have been nice to have just a little more variety. I will say the camera can also be problematic at times. Most of the levels are pretty tight and small, so it's really easy to lose track of the action or even where you are if there's like a big enemy right in your face. This isn't necessarily a problem in the bigger areas, but those are few and far between. And I couldn't help but shake this notion that this started out as a completely different game and they just slapped the Valkyrie franchise on it. Now I don't know that for sure, it's just a guess. And I kind of say that because it feels so different from past games, and it's not like turn-based JRPGs are out of style anymore. If anything, they're back better than ever. That said, this game is still super fun. It takes a little while to get going, especially in the beginning chapters when you don't have any of your Anheriar, but once you get your full team and a good arsenal of weapons, this is where the game truly shines. I love doing the side quests because the combat was so fun and there was just enough exploration to scratch that itch. Visually speaking, Valkyrie Elysium is odd. It feels like they had one style and then just slapped on a cel-shaded black border. To me, it just doesn't feel cohesive. It felt like they had this art style and it was just kind of bland and they needed something to add some extra style to it. It doesn't really look bad, but it just doesn't look like it goes together. I can say the same thing for the environments. They're all so small and narrow, so it doesn't really give too much opportunity for it all to shine. I will say the music is a real highlight from composer Matoe Sakuraba. Admittedly, I'm not usually a fan of his work, but it was very fitting here with this Norse setting. While a little confusing at first glance, Valkyrie Elysium ultimately comes together for a fun experience. It has awesome combat with deep customization and a story that, while it starts off kind of slow, ultimately builds towards something intriguing. Obviously, it doesn't have the biggest budget in the world, and it really shows in its presentational shortcomings like the facial animation, small environments, and lack of enemy variety. Clocking in at around 12 hours, Valkyrie Elysium was a little shorter than I was expecting. That said, you could probably add an extra 5 to 10 hours if you want to finish every side quest, get every collectible, fully upgrade every weapon, and get to the bottom of every skill tree. If you're looking for a solid action RPG with great combat, you should be in for a great time with Valkyrie Elysium. Now, September is absolutely jam-packed with tons of great JRPGs. In fact, if you haven't seen my review for Trails from Zero, you definitely want to click on it and watch it right here. And if you love JRPGs and want to stay up to date with the latest news, reviews, and other fun videos, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.